Good evening, everyone. Actually, able to remove my mask from up here. Thank you. I hope you'll be able to hear me better as a result. Welcome to Crystal Bridges, and welcome to our opening exhibition conversation for In American Waters. My name is Austin Barron Bailey. I'm Chief Curator here at Crystal Bridges. As we begin, I want to recognize Crystal Bridges' role as settlers and guests in the Northwest Arkansas region. We acknowledge the Caddo, Quapaw, and Osage, as well as the many Indigenous caretakers of this land. We appreciate the enduring influence of the vibrant, diverse, and contemporary cultures of Indigenous peoples. We are conscious of the role in colonization that museums have played. As cultural institutions, we have a responsibility to engage in the dismantling of historical and systemic invisibility of Indigenous peoples past, present, and future. We choose to intentionally hold ourselves accountable to appropriate conversation, representation, connection, and education to facilitate a space of measurable change. This evening, we have the great privilege to celebrate the opening of the exhibition In American Waters, The Sea in American Painting. And I'm delighted to be in conversation with my co-curator, Dan Finnemore from the Peabody Essex Museum, and Clifford Ross, an artist featured prominently in the show as well. Our conversation tonight is really designed to give you a sense of what excites us about this exhibition, give you a little bit a sense of the overview of the themes and the ideas and the talents of the painters. And we will give you a little sense too about how the project came together and give you a sense of this emotional journey. When you enter the gallery, if you haven't had a chance already, please sign our logbook with your name and hometown as you enter the experience. You'll come into a space that gives you a sense of the marine, portraying the marine. Then we'll bring you just offshore after you've gone to port. Then we'll bring you into a voyages section where you'll see images of war, the transatlantic slave trade, voyages of life, vulnerability, expedition, and exploration. Then you'll come into a section that looks at horizons and seascapes, paintings that take you to the beyond. And then you'll come back to the threshold for beachcombing and to think about contemplation by the sea. Before we jump fully into our conversation, I'd like to extend our gratitude to the generous sponsors of In American Waters, Bob and Becky Alexander, Harrison and Rhonda French family, Mary Beth and Mickey Mayfield, Sue and Charles Redfield, Jeff and Sarah Teague, Citizens Bank, and James Zigris. Please join me in recognizing their support. Thank you so much. I also want to give a special thanks to the Peabody Essex Museum, our co-organizer in this project, for their partnership and their support and enthusiasm for our initial partnership together. And thank you all for coming tonight and spending your evening with us. So before I welcome Dan and Clifford, I also want to let you know that there are about 90 works in the show from 38 lenders across the country from private and public collections, and that 40% of those works come from the Crystal Bridges and Peabody Essex Museum collections. So it's a really exciting way to anchor our partnership. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce Dan Finnemore, the Russell W. Knight Curator of Maritime Art and History at the Peabody Essex Museum. Dan has organized more than 15 exhibitions of American and European painting and decorative arts at PEM. He has written over 40 articles and chapters for academic and popular publications and is the author or editor of 6 books, including Capturing Poseidon, Photographic Encounters with the Sea, Maritime History as World History, and Fiery Pool, the Maya and the Mythic Sea. He also curated the 2017 traveling exhibition Ocean Liners, Glamour, Speed, and Style, which was co-organized with the Victoria and Albert Museum. Clifford Ross is an artist whose singular goal has been to create work that relates to the sublime in nature. Using both realistic and abstract means to achieve his goals, he often develops radically new approaches to existing media. He began his career as a painter and sculptor, and in 1994 became deeply involved with photography and other media. He began his Hurricane series in 1996, entering the surf during extreme weather, and you'll see a preview of that tonight. His photographic techniques expanded over time to include digital methods, inkjet printing, and ultimately developing a unique method of printing on wood. Clifford's work have been exhibited in museums around the world and are in many collections, including the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Parrish Art Museum, the J. Paul Getty Museum, and the Museum of Fine Arts Houston. Please join me in welcoming Clifford and Dan to the stage. Well, we wanted to start off, the images that you've been looking on the screen tonight, on the upper left, this is a view from the hotel in downtown Salem, looking out towards the harbor, just near the Peabody Essex Museum. And in the right, you're seeing Crystal Bridges. And we wanted to give you a sense of what it meant to bring these organizations together, our collections together, to think in a completely new way about marine painting and marine art, as Clifford, you have done in your art as well. But we really wanted to think, why has marine painting and ship portraits and other kinds of marine histories been separated, even segregated from the histories of American art? Why can't we bring these things together? And why can't we also do it with a museum on the coast and a museum that is landlocked? And when you see the Crystal Bridges campus, you're seeing the Town Branch Creek flowing out from our Crystal Spring towards the Arkansas River, which ultimately feeds into the Mississippi and onto the Gulf and onto the Atlantic. So that sense of the fluidity of the connections to the waters beyond on which Salem sits, I think have been a big part of this.
I think there's no doubt that, you can't hear me? Oh, I should be speaking down a little bit more. Okay. Thank you. I think there's little doubt that people have compartmentalized American marine painting to assume that it's really just about the East Coast and about New England, and it's just something that speaks to specialists, those who were ship captains or who have an intimate knowledge of the sea. And today, it would be those who were descended from those generations or who are also sailors. And that, to me, was always a barrier. As a curator, my goal has always been to reach the broadest audience. But I work in a museum that has specifically gone out of their way to collect marine art for a knowledgeable audience. But then when Austin really sank her teeth into this collection, she started turning up paintings in a mainstream American art kind of a venue that were completely infused with marine themes that I believe this museum may not have recognized to the extent that I think most American art curators had never quite realized. And so one of the great points of this show is that if you look, you will see so much more interaction with the sea among American artists across time, over 300 years in the show.
Absolutely.
You know, I just have to say one thing. When I first met you all, you were doing the show, I thought, yes, American marine painting, very nice. I'm very happy to be in it. But I thought we were dealing with a fairly conservative, staid thing that I sort of understood from afar. And when I came up to see the first iteration of the show at the Peabody Essex, I was knocked flat. I was so surprised at what you all decided to show us as American marine painting. And I'm somebody that I thought I knew, and to sort of find out how much I didn't know was a lot of the thrill for me. Great.
So we've selected several works from the show just to give you a flavor of the ones that really we think introduce some of the key ways that the sea has shaped America and its painters. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Did I skip one?
There we go.
Okay. Dan, do you want to kick off this?
Yeah,
looking at the Zane Salem.
As I was referring before, some of the traditional presentations of marine art, what people think they see. In the upper left there is a painting that today can be viewed as very graphically powerful folk art that anyone can appreciate, but also in its day it was conveying very specific dimensions and information of importance about a ship like this. And this is an artist who probably painted 50 or 100 portraits of vessels all in broadside, and then this schematic kind of representation of the sea around it. And his paintings were intended to be hung together in a ship chandler's office, so that if you were booking passage or shipping cargo, I could say, you really want to send your cargo on the ship Zane, and here's the configuration of the ship, and this is why. Whereas in the lower right, what you're looking at is a painting by Fitzhenry Lane, a very accomplished mid-19th century sort of luminist style, Hudson River School style painter, who has set those very accurate kind of representations into a holistic scene of Boston Harbor. But all of it is filled with the sort of encoded information that a knowledgeable viewer of the day would have recognized: the signal flags, the figurehead, all of that kind of information. But he's done it in a way that is far more sort of enveloping and encompassing for the modern viewer today, I think.
And one of the things we wanted to do was to think about the ways in which ship portraits and the ability of an artist to convey the attributes of the ship, its character, its seaworthiness, its speed, is not unlike the genre of portraiture writ large. So the same ways in which a human sitter's characteristics and profiles and features and attributes are captured, we wanted to bring that together and show that blend. And this is a marvelous portrait, a rare image of a ship captain in his quarters on his ship.
So this is a portrait by Charles Wilson Peale. And you can see, obviously, he's a ship captain. And you have to sort of disassemble it to know why you realize that. But instantly you can tell, because the windows behind him are canted outward. So it's obviously not a regular piece of domestic architecture. That's where ship captains' cabins were, at the stern of the ships. Over his head there, you see a telltale compass. It's a compass that essentially operates upside down so that the captain doesn't have to go on deck to look at the deck compass and make sure the helmsman is steering properly. He can do that from his cabin. So obviously this man is in charge. That is really the representation of that. And then off to the left, you can see his dividers on top of the compass. So he is directing where the ship is going.
And you have to love the little anchors on the brass buttons of his coat. Such a fabulous detail. And when you go through the exhibition, if you haven't had a chance already, there are so many details that will be revealed to you upon closer looking. And we encourage you to really explore that visual experience. This is another classic kind of ship portrait by Norman Rockwell, an early 1922 picture that we thought would be fun to show because it captures everything you expect when you think of an image of a sailor. The tattoo, the parrot on the shoulder. He's constructing a meticulous ship model. The little boy peeking over with the cap on.
It also shows, I think, this sort of sense of nautical culture being this inside baseball kind of experience that we were talking about before, which is only a piece of maritime art, because Norman Rockwell himself was not a specialist marine painter of any sort. But here he is sort of building the model with the little boy off there over the table staring, wearing his captain's hat, looking. And so this is like an intergenerational transfer of this insider knowledge. I have spent my life at sea, right, and I'm going to tell you what it's like.
Yeah. And then conveying it through magazine covers to a much broader audience. And pirates.
That's right.
Must have pirates.
So it's very strange to say, this is one of my favorite paintings in the show, because Howard Pyle, who was the teacher of N.C. Wyeth and Frank Schoonover and a whole world of very, very successful illustrators who were very influential. I wouldn't be surprised, if some of you would say, oh, all my knowledge of the marine life comes from these Scribner's books, Treasure Island, that he illustrated, and that sort of thing in the 1910s and 20s. Howard Pyle, I like to think of as the man who single-handedly transformed the brutal, murderous, outlaw activity of piracy on the seas into a romantic experience in which embodies American values, where a man could be himself, he could branch out, he could break away from a social hierarchy and be as big as he could dream. Obviously, this poor pirate, it didn't work out for him. He broke some kind of code of pirate ethics, if there was one, and he was abandoned on shore there.
Yeah. Dan and I have had some fun talking about different pieces when we did a walkabout at Peabody Essex. And as the disruptor here amongst the three of us, so I just love the way Dan talks to us about this picture, and I get it, and I learn a lot, and I get excited, and I think of Pirates of the Caribbean and all sorts of cool things. When I look at this with my own sort of hat on, I almost can say that, and I adore the picture, I'm almost forgiving the pirate, because what I'm intrigued by is this, there's a luminous glow, and it's not a huge leap for me to think of Rothko. And even though it may seem egregious to say something like that, there's complete room for, I feel, the sort of much more curatorial and deep knowledge that Dan has, and the way he's approaching it with this other reaction. And I think that for any audience such as you, for the three of us, the trick is to come to this work and find your way into it. Mm-hmm. Each person has their right to relate to the work, like it or not. I love this piece. I admire it for what Dan just said. But when I look at it, and I feel this I feel the gold bullion has somehow escaped into the clouds. I feel Rothko, and this exquisite little breaking wave. I can't help but think of a hokusai, a breaking wave. And it is an incredibly incisive vision of pure romance for me. And so it's sort of a fun thing for you all when you run into this. Where on the spectrum do you fall?
Right. Absolutely. The other kind of portraiture that we're really proud to include in this exhibition is work by African-American artists Huey Lee Smith and Jacob Lawrence. And what these two works happen to do is combine the actual service in the Navy of these two artists with their modern art. And Huey Lee Smith was involved in a special training unit and recruiting unit, and he's showing here a portrait of Dennis Nelson, who worked with President Harry Truman on the executive order that led to the formal desegregation of the U.S. Armed Forces in 1948. So the Navy, as a pathway to opportunity, to training, to education, and to the dismantling of the ideology of segregated forces, is captured here in a unique vision by Huey Lee Smith, showing the journey of these rural workers to Navy sailors. Jacob Lawrence served in the Coast Guard, which operated in the U.S. as a part of the U.S. Navy during World War II on the first integrated ship during World War II. And this is actually a portrait, a kind of apotheosis of Captain Carlton Skinner, who commanded that ship and was a tremendous advocate for integrating the armed forces and of Jacob Lawrence's own career, reclassifying Jacob Lawrence from a very kind of servile rank within the armed forces to a combat artist of the Public Relations Division. So Lawrence ended up being quoted in the New York Times, for example, as saying the democracy that he experienced in the Coast Guard was the best democracy he'd ever known. So the ways in which these modern artists are combining their marine experience with their artistic and creative expression, I think is particularly an exciting development that we were able to capture in this show. It also speaks to this, we wanted to capture as well the sense of community that marine life has fostered throughout the centuries. And Dan, you should talk about this one because this is a view of Salem practically today.
It was painted in 1802 by someone who I am calling the first native-born American marine painter who specialized in marine scenes. And so this is, for a while it was Austin's hometown. Now it's still my hometown. And the whole notion of launching ships like this was as a community endeavor, reached way beyond those who built the ships and those who had invested in the ships or the sailors who went beyond. The entire town, the success lived and died on the success of these vessels. And so as a community endeavor, you see in the foreground all the people who have come out to celebrate the launching. The ship is named the Fame, and all these people on the deck, and everyone is doffing their caps, and it's a great big celebratory event. But it's also one of high-risk behavior, of course, because they knew what the risks of sending these ships and their sailors to sea. Clifford, you had some insights about this as well. I remember you talking about it.
No, I mean, I just think it's the sort of painting that just shocked me when I first saw the show. And just the vocabulary, how it's painted. I've never seen a painting that was put together that way. And one is tempted to talk about certain naive qualities of it, where frankly, the flags seem oversized, and I think that was a sort of a declaration of enthusiasm on the part of the painter, more than it was the real thing. But I had such a sense of the vitality there, honestly, and it's a constructive vitality. It is much less real than the Fitzhenry Lane you were talking about, and yet it speaks to us. It's funny, I want to say it speaks to us in a modern vocabulary. There are short bursts of information brilliantly put in paint in front of us, and we absorb it quickly. So it's we want to say it's an old-fashioned looking piece, but it has a very modern capability. I love the painting.
Oh, I love that. We got oohs and ahs from the audience on
Yes.
this one.
This one is, I think it's fair to say, it's not a term that I use lightly. I don't think any of us would. It's a tour de force. When you see it, it glows in the room, by an artist named Francis Augustus Silva, who painted off New Jersey and in the Hudson River and then up to Boston Harbor area in the 1860s and 70s. He was a Civil War veteran, and he was a very potent sort of, he argued very strongly for American artists painting what he called American views. And so not just the locations being American, but also in an American style. He was very offended, outspokenly so, that his colleagues, his artists from Boston would head off to France, for instance, and learn Impressionist painting and come home having painted French scenes. He thought that was terrible. This is Boston Harbor, and you can only tell that from a very, very distance. Off to the left there's Boston Light and a very distinctive island there. But what he's accomplished, I think, really clearly here is a very carefully studied presentation of American boat designs for those who would recognize the schooner in the foreground and then the two sloops behind. And so he spent very painstaking time studying, just getting the right moment where the sails are reacting to the very light wind and those rippling water there. But then he's laid these images over just an incredibly fleeting moment, this ephemeral scene of chromatic radiance where the sunlight is flashing across and you've just got this rolling color, in which, as we've all experienced it, is there, and then by the time you turn to the person next to you and say, look, it's already gone, right, or it's changed. And so he really overlaid those two. That was a technique, I think, which allowed him to achieve the sort of Americanness that he was striving for. We have a couple of sketches I think we can show. And so these show, so many of his sketches survive, and some of them are on display. I mean, you can see how he studied the sail configurations very carefully, but then also he spent a lot of time trying to capture the color palette and the changing ephemeral nature of the sky. The one on the left there, he was probably did in the field in the bottom, and it's on a cigar box lid. So he was just trying to capture what he saw quickly before it went away.
Before you go forward, can we go back one step?
Yeah.
Because what Dan said is so interesting to me, because when I first saw this, I think my reaction was, you're kidding. And to me, this painting, it's funny, just a moment, I'm thinking of Michael Jordan going through the air for much too long a distance, stopping in midair, looking around, and then dropping the basketball through the hoop. This picture is an impossible painting. I was a painter before I was involved in photography, but when I looked at it, it shouldn't exist at its high level, but it does. And the very things Dan was talking about, such a beautiful description, my take on it was, wow, I believe in those sailboats, and I could feel they were loving portraits of sailboats in action and all of that. The background is, I've never seen a sunset like it. I think that maybe, he had a psilocybin trip or something. It is the biggest stretch about nature that I've seen and connected to the real world. But this amazing artist brought it together. And, this to me is one of the miracles in the show. It's so shockingly successful. And it really just, I don't know, it's one of those surprising thrills for me.
That's great. That's great.
Well, and thinking about your response to this work and what it takes to, as you said, sort of push beyond the reality while reckoning with it, and the process and the study, really made us think about your work, Clifford, and how you might think of yourself as a marine artist. And I think we have the video of you photographing the surf. Just a minute. Come on. Oh, there it goes.
Who is that crazy guy?
Clifford, tell us about this. I love also how the video cuts just as it looks like that wave is about to crash right over you.
Yeah.
And we get the aerial view.
Yeah. No artists were harmed in the making of this video. You know?
Good.
Maybe a couple of cameras, though, I suspect.
Well, the way you just sort of introduced this makes me think about the reason that was shot. And there was a very interesting filmmaker who was trying to do some documentary work around what I did and asked if he could join me when I was going to do a shoot. And I don't really like that idea very much, but I did say yes to him because he was very respectful, said, "We'll throw out all the footage if you don't like it." But he brought a drone. And that shot that you see was really not supposed to be about me. But he was curious to see if the digital waves that he had seen had any basis in reality. The digital waves, which if you've been to the show or about to, is what Austin and Dan have included. It is completely computer generated. But the computer generated work that I did is based on, as you can see, it was fairly close observation of nature. And so I knew what to try to bring forth from a computer. And what I was doing there was not investigating in any formal sense for the work that's in the show here. But this is the sort of photo that I take. And I have a wide variety of work that I do. But these ocean waves, I call them hurricanes because I go out to shoot when a hurricane is either offshore generating waves or it's landed. And the extreme drama, the power of nature, I'm in its thrall. And I am a very tiny little visitor in a very big world. And that excites me. It actually, I'm not a particularly brave person, but I feel a sense of, I feel no danger, and I feel blessedly small on this earth when I'm doing that. And so part of my goal is not that different than the artists in this show otherwise, even though my means may be different. I want to show the sea, and I happen to be an American artist. So.
Yeah. And we have this great picture that I think gives you a sense of how you move between media.
So on the wall in my studio are a number of the small studies of these larger prints that I made. The larger prints can go up to 12 by 18 feet. And their size speaks to the power of nature. But when they're small, there's a lyricism and a strength that I like. And what you're seeing here is I am fairly incompetent with computers and with knowledge of the digital world, but I love to try to force it to do things that I'm interested in. So I'm smart enough to find smart people. And the fellow who's there is a wonderful guy from Tel Aviv. And Yuval worked with me for over 3 years. It took 2 years to figure out how to build me a patch of ocean in a computer. And so what's sort of amusing, what Austin has pointed out is, I set it up this way so that he could not escape, nor could I, the reality, these pictures I took in the ocean as we built our waves and our ocean.
I think our next slide, these are stills of the digital wave in the exhibition. And Clifford, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your technique. And I think I also wanted to add that what Dan and I were so drawn to in Clifford's work is the ways in which you are so deeply engaged and invested in how the traditions of marine painting, light, texture, color, can be translated into the digital realm, can be put into motion, and how even the little LED dots are like the weave of a canvas, and how you want the digital work to be treated like a painting in the galleries. But tell us about the composition and the inspiration more.
Well, in the simplest of terms, I'm always aware of what I haven't done. And I spent years, decades, working on black and white photographs of these dramatic waves. And I took the color out very early on because it interfered with the drama and the form, which I felt was the best way to get to the human heart, to your human hearts and mine. The one thing that a still photograph doesn't seem to do, oddly, is move. And I went out with a video camera at least 2 or 3 times to try to take video that somehow would bring movement to you all. And I failed spectacularly. Everything I did was terrible. And it was just it was so unremarkable. And I just put it away, and it was just, I moved on. And at a certain point, I had this idea. I learned about something that Hollywood did. How many people here saw a movie called, was it The Perfect Storm or A Perfect Storm with George Clooney? And anyway, we're all looking at George Clooney looking super handsome, and we're praying for him. As a result, we're not looking very carefully at the wave that's coming to get him. What Hollywood does is they take 300 dots, if you will, and they move them through space, and they put a skin over it. Welcome to the ocean of a perfect storm. And when I learned a little bit about this, I thought, wow, yeah, that's kind of interesting. And being a fan of all sorts of ocean photography and painting, I began to think, wow, is there any room in here for me? And I, with this incredible level of ignorance, began to poke around. And the guy that you saw with the beard, and not to be so crazily anecdotal, but he came into, he interviewed for a job on a whole different project for me that involved animating a mountain. And he showed me his portfolio of things he'd worked on. And I hadn't thought of this in years. But so there was a Ford truck in slow motion, and the wheel, the tire, hit into a big muddy puddle, and there was a splash. And we were talking about a whole other project, and I said, hold it, can you go back? And he said, sorry, I said, no, I want to see that truck again. And it was the splash out of a muddy puddle that blew my mind. And I said, yeah, how do you do that? And that guy is the guy that introduced me to what the perfect storm wave systems were. What we do, 300,000 dots in space didn't work for me. I just felt I wanted to get to the basis of it. And we sort of broke apart the software. And we move about 3.2 million dots in space simultaneously. And we can affect the speed with which things are moving, gravity, and so on. And with all the various tools that I was taught, we built a patch of ocean where I could simulate not so much the reality, but the feeling that I felt in the ocean to share it. I was desperate to do better than my photographs. And it wasn't that I was lacking in pride about the photographs, but I hadn't told the proper or the whole story. And what you'll see when you're in the show is it's the same piece I have in my own studio, in my own home. It's a vertical. We often think of seascapes having to be horizontal largely. And it is a slice of this very activated ocean, which I built.
Yeah. And I think our next one, we have, we wanted to include some of these, really, Dan, you should talk about this because it's so early, but this wave, we wanted to include a couple of the next images really about how artists are drawn to try to create and capture those waves that Clifford, your art is activating in a completely innovative way.
Yeah, this is Washington Allston in 1804, so another incredibly early American representation of the sea. And those are impossible waves, one would think, but here is a pilot boat heading out through them to bring that ship that's coming in from overseas into the safe harbor. So it's a very symbolic image there of the duty of the American sailor, and whatever he confronts, he's heading out in order to save that ship, which would otherwise not be able to bring it in after probably 9 months or a year overseas. It's sort of at the origins, the very early stages of America's international commerce.
We also wanted to recognize that the experience and the kind of turbulent waves that you see in a painting like Allston, or the experience of the sea, is also one that is completely connected to the voyages of people to this country. And this is a work by Teresa Bernstein, who is not very well-known woman artist from the early 20th century. She emigrated from Poland, and this is her scene of the passengers riding in steerage class, which is the most economical, sort of cheapest accommodation to travel across the Atlantic, coming up on deck for a moment of socialization and dancing and gathering and game playing with the children in the front, the babies getting fresh air, the women conversing. And I think, and Dan, you can talk about how this is actually like on the ocean liner with the smokestack and this whole on-deck experience.
Yeah, I think that you also see something of like a moment of contemplation. A couple of people are just sort of staring off, thinking about the land that they departed from and what awaits them in their new lives. But this is the origin story of so many Americans, how their families came to America, and not the grandiose stories necessarily, but probably the majority of people who came from Europe at least. And this is a very, very common scene from the 1920s, not the steerage of the 19th century where people were getting sick and dying below decks. It was like a mechanized kind of crossing where a single ship might carry 1,000 immigrants, and they would arrive at Ellis Island and then be processed. And so it was such an everyday, mundane kind of process in America at the time that very few people ever thought to paint it. So this kind of image is surprisingly rare to me, since it was so central to the American story.
Yeah, and it's a personal reflection as well. The woman holding the baby in the center is sort of a combined reflection, homage of the artist's own experience and also that of her mother, because she again had come as a young child. This takes us far, far away from Ellis Island to Herschel Island on the northern coast of Alaska. And this is by John Bertoncini. And tell us about the ships frozen in there, Dan.
So this painting is just so crazy. I just love it. It is, John Bertoncini was a whaling captain, and he was a real raconteur. And he told stories about what he had done as a youth, had blackbirding on islands where they would trick people, native islanders, onto the ships, telling that they would hire them for a few months, and then the ships would just take off. So they would be trapped on board the ship for essentially free labor. And that was what he did when he was young. By the time he made it to being a ship captain, they would take these whaling vessels, steam whalers in the 1890s, out of San Francisco and go through the Bering Straits and up above Alaska until you're over the Yukon, and then they would intentionally freeze the ships in for the winter so that in the springtime, when the ice first broke up, the whales, the bowhead whales, I think, would come up through the ice and they would be able to hunt them. They would be the first ones there. And they did that for about 6 or 8 years until they had hunted the whole, the whole population out. But what he's painted here, I think, is just his winter vision of what they would do while the ships were all frozen in. And I think he's created it a lot like a ship captain you'd expect to create a sea chart. It's a white expanse with some activity areas here, there, and elsewhere. So what we're looking at is, in addition to the ships, we see this community in the background, but let's see, all the way to the right, all the way at the top there, you can just see some little ant-like figures. Those people are skiing. They're taking their skis and climbing up the hill and then skiing down. In the foreground here in the center, they're playing some kind of game. And my colleagues and I have argued whether it's soccer or football, we have no idea. But on the left is clearly baseball because there's the diamond there. So Bertoncini actually talked about it. He said, imagine playing baseball at 50 degrees below zero in fur uniforms. And the weird paint color, I believe, is one that reflects not so much the paint scheme that he brought with him, the palette of paints that he brought with him, but he would steal the ship's paints. So this was probably paints that were used to paint the cabin or the deck of the ship, and he would just use those because that's what he had available to him.
I just have to say that this is one of my favorite paintings in the show. And it is completely wackadoodle. It just, this was a ship captain who was, doing something, I guess, a little bit with his spare time, took it fairly seriously. But with a very low level of skill, he produced a great painting. And, when you see it, it's a modest-sized painting. And, just the idea that, well, sun is yellow and let's put that over there. And there's just this incredible unfettered freedom when you see this painting. And it's lyrical, it's certainly amusing, but it's also really, at a modest scale, I think a really great painting.
Hope you guys like it as much as we do.
Yeah, it's just, and you feel through the laugh when you see it,
It's amazing. The skiers are
great.
incredible. It's great. This is another work that takes us to kind of the far reaches of our planet, if you will, going around. I'm going to get it wrong, Dennis.
Through the Straits of Magellan.
Through the Straits of Magellan, exactly. So this is the Great White Fleet. This was a diplomatic mission in 1908, authorized by President Roosevelt. And Henry Roederdahl, again, an artist that has not necessarily made it into the canon of American art, but was embedded on these ships and painted a beautiful impressionistic vision of this parade of white vessels.
Something like 16, what they call dreadnoughts. There were white hulls, and therefore they called it the Great White Fleet, which by today's standards is quite an unfortunate title, I think. But the symbolism of it passing from the Atlantic into the Pacific through the Straits of Magellan was very powerful right after the Spanish-American War, and which had engagements both in the Caribbean and in the Philippines. Roederdahl was personally selected by Theodore Roosevelt. He wanted Roederdahl specifically to be the artist. And some of you have probably seen other works by Roederdahl, but ones that he didn't sign because he was one of the primary artists for World War I recruitment posters. And so they are done in a very different style than these. This was his sort of play and impressionism, but most of his things are sort of hyper-realist things of men loading artillery shells into big, enormous gun barrels.
Yeah.
This painting shocked me because I almost walked right by it, uninteresting, and then something went like this. And there is this incredibly thick paint that's been applied to it, and then the colors drift off, the green and red and white together in the clouds, and it began to pull me in. And it is just incredibly lovingly painted, and leaving the obviously political problem we have now with what is it called, the Great White Fleet. It is painful today, at least for me, to be thinking about all the subliminal sort of issues that go with that. But as a painting, it's amazing. And this to me is a lesson in scale, because the painting is very big and big brushstrokes, but go in and look at it intimately. And when Austin was talking about the tiny little bulbs and my digital waves on the LEDs, go up to my digital wave, and I probably shouldn't be saying this.
Don't tell them that. No, you
don't tell them. Okay, I'm on a short lease. But in any event, you can go up close to it and look. And each of those little bulbs is transmitting something to you, and it's a very nice thing to look at intimately. This painting has so much to do with that. Because if you get especially to that boat in the lower left corner, if you go in and look at it, there is a world that opens up to you. It's like smelling a flower suddenly after looking at it. And so many paintings in this show that you all have assembled, there's the big picture of it. But as you get into the picture, there is so much to be found.
Do you want to talk about this one, Dan?
Sure, yeah. This is an artist that probably, well, few, if any of you who ever heard of, Clement Drew, who was a Boston painter. On the backs of some of his works, he would say, Clement Drew, 8 Court Street, Boston, paintings for sale or rent. So I think he was decorating offices from the 1830s to the 1880s. And they're all very decorative pictures of waves crashing against lighthouses and ships rounding rocky promontories and the kinds of things you would want behind your office desk if you're a lawyer or you're trying to send a strong business message. And one painting, and so we all thought that we sort of knew Clement Drew because we'd seen so many paintings like that. And then this painting turned up. And it tells us something completely different that we never knew about him. And it's a very sort of metaphorical work. On the right is the ship. On the stern of the ship, it says Abolition. So this is the name of the ship, Abolition. And on the left, it's rescuing the crew. You can see the boat in the center picking up the crew of the wreck there on the left of the ship Colonization. So it's a very clear message in the 1830s about the debate of whether freed, former enslaved people should be recolonized and sent back to Africa or whether they should become American citizens. And so it's set in Boston Harbor, right where Drew painted. That's Boston Light there. And in the foreground, which you can't see because of the letters here, but you can in the show, is a barrel floating. It says N.E. Rum on it. So it's clearly a reference to New England rum and sort of the complicity of New England merchants in the slave-based economy in the Caribbean. And then there's messaging at the top, which is so unsubtle. It's you'll be able to read them when you get up there. It's like all men are created free. Oh, yes, right. All men are created free and equal, immediate emancipation. And these were all statements of the abolitionist movement and in the Liberator, William Lloyd Garrison's newspaper at the time. And so all of a sudden we come to realize that Clement Drew was an ardent abolitionist. And so many of these marine painters are completely anonymous, other than the fact that they clearly engaged directly with their clients and not through some kind of public sales that would have left a record. We have no idea where their political affiliations may have lay. And so poking around a little bit more, we found out that he lived on the north slope of Beacon Hill in Boston, which at the time was the black neighborhood in Boston. And so here he was fully engaged in this very, very political act. And this is very early in his career, and nothing else turns up later on. As to what the significance of that is, we have yet to figure out.
Yeah. And this work by Kerry James Marshall, who is an artist represented in Crystal Bridges' collection, really extends the legacy into a different dimension for the African diaspora, for thinking about the Black Atlantic. And he's really interested, Kerry James Marshall is very interested in marine traditions as they relate to histories of the transatlantic slave trade and the cultural intermixing that transpires when Africans were brought to the Americas. And what you're seeing here is a meditation on both the Atlantic and the ocean as a place of loss, a place of death and destruction, but also transformation, also cultural regeneration. And that red cross in the corner to us signifies or denotes a crisis. We think of the American Red Cross, but it's also a point of intersection. And for Marshall to refract this Black figure between the sort of Christian North America, the 3 symbolizes the Trinity, and the 7, which symbolizes the 7 deities of the Yoruba religion. He's got the word South there, and even in the bottom left it says, that old-time religion is good enough for me. He's referencing the kind of cleansing and baptismal waters to find new life, new religion, new ideas, new cultures. And so a work like this is very much a part of how contemporary artists are completely reimagining what marine painting can be and the histories to which it's connected. This is this is in the same gallery as the Kerry James Marshall to reflect on the ways in which oceanography and a deeper understanding of that oceanic space, the ocean floor and its depths, came into prominence in the 1850s. So this is imagining the view undersea.
It's a painting by Edward Morin, who, with his brother Thomas, became famous for painting pictures of the American West. There were grandiose images of Monument Valley and the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone and those things, which I think you can conjure up pretty easily. And here Edward Morin has just sort of gone over the edge into a place where he had no vision. He didn't have a peek at it other than maybe things that had been washed ashore. This is painted in the 1860s, an era before the big oceanographic expeditions, the dredging expeditions had come up. So maybe he had just seen the beginnings of the studies of the corals and the anemone and things that you see all in the foreground. And he's put it all together into this kind of living community in a way that he had very few tools to do. So he felt obviously free to just work his way through and create a world of his own.
I have to say, anybody that's gone into the water, you can't see that far under the water. And in terms of artistic license, I mean, we had so much fun in front of this painting because I looked at it and I thought, gee, it's a great picture. And then I realized it's underwater, but wait a minute. It was basically, it could have been a view of Yosemite, except you can't see that far. But artists can really take you on a great trip and let yourself go into it. It's a great one.
And here is the wave that this is in the Crystal Bridges collection. It's William Tross Richards' Along the Shore. And it has inspired so much conversation with you, Clifford, about what Tross Richards is trying to achieve in painting and its relationship to your work. And I think we even have a detail of this section of the wave on the left where you just see that translucency, the foam. But we'd love to hear in your words what this painting means to you relative to the art you have created. It's a blockbuster American painting, marine or not. And what's the definition of a blockbuster? Something that knocks your socks off. It's not complicated. It doesn't take a lot of art history to appreciate it. One is in front of a phenomenon more than being in front of just a painting. And what he has done here is remarkable. He has seen that the light coming through a wave is part of that mysterious drama. And so it's not just the crashing wave, and he's got that exquisite little moment of the two sails on the horizon. He has the light glinting off of the bird. He's got that rock, which has been pounded for thousands of years. It's still there. And that wave has, I can tell you, it is staggering to me that a painter could have seen that without the aid of a camera. And I'm always shocked. And I have a feeling about what my camera is going to see, but you really only know until you've looked at the negative and printed it or looked at the digital file. And I just think it's a miraculous and incredibly moving picture. Yeah. It's really something. Very transporting. And here is one of your works to give the sense.
So, yeah, this is one of those moments where you try to get out of the way. It's this particular wave was probably about, I think surfers call it double overhead, which is 12, 14 feet high. And you sort of see the position I'm in when I'm shooting. But I feel that with that Tross Richards, there's just such an obvious, almost embarrassingly so, affinity. I've been set up for success by these very nice folks here. The idea that I could be in dialogue with Tross Richards is such a pleasure. It's not just about modern art. And I'm sitting here in 2021 with you. We're in dialogue across centuries to the past. And if we do our job on this planet, hopefully well into the future. But the sea is an extraordinary thing, and it's filled with, you know, the power that's there and the lyricism that's in so many of the works. What you can't see in this particular wave is the thing that I have seen, which Trost Richards had painted, which is that luminosity.
Right.
So,
Yeah, well, both of your work and his work, to me, sort of speak volumes because they lack narrative. They are simply about the sea. There's no location specifically. It's not this coast or that coast. There isn't a particular piece of historical action taking place, no naval vessel, no commercial vessel. I mean, it's a timeless experience of the sea, which is, you know, what Richards experienced in the late 1890s, is what Clifford experiences when he drags his camera out into the surf today.
Absolutely. And I think, and this is this is one of the models to try to achieve, right, the digital wave.
yeah, just very briefly, that bearded fellow who was looking intently at a screen, this is the sort of thing he's looking at. And the way I can describe moving all those dots, I drove them crazy, but I said, yes, there's the steel barrier. Depending on how we shape the steel barrier, when it runs into all the ping pong balls, which is how I envisioned it, that would make the shape of the wave. And so what you're doing here is you're looking inside the method of creating a wave for the digital wave, which hopefully you'll all see as part of the exhibit.
I love that. It's a screenshot of that. So let's see. This is an extraordinary Arthur Dove, and I'm mindful of time, so I think we might move a little quickly through these. But just to give a sense, I think, of the range of style and approaches to where do you lose sight of the horizon, where can you feel it, where does it take you beyond, and all the different ways that historical to modern and to contemporary artists have tried to capture the experience of the wave and its momentum. This is Norman Lewis. He was born in Harlem, the son of immigrants from Bermuda, and actually worked as a merchant seaman early in his career. He became very famous for extraordinary semi-abstract paintings of civil rights events and protests, and even Ku Klux Klan rallies. And he, after that period in the 70s, went to Greece and became enthralled with long walks along the seashore in Greece. And these sort of roiling elliptical forms are kind of his way of completely reimagining the experience of that surf. This whole atmosphere is kind of infused with black, and it takes you into a very different dimension, I think, of the experience of kind of color, form, and luminosity. Dan, do you want to talk about the Kay Walking Stick?
So Kay Walking Stick, I believe, will be here in the...
Yeah, she will be doing a program on November 16th, virtual program. This is an artist in her 80s, still working. She made this painting last year.
Last year, so that's the most recent painting in the show. And she has never really been known for painting seascapes, as a matter of fact. I don't think she really tried until quite recently, but always spent her vacations heading up to New England, and this painting is of Newcastle Island near Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And it's not a historical view of any sort, it's just what she sees when she stands on the coast near the hotel she stays. And there's a breakwater, it's just a very sort of prosaic moment. And she's overlain it, though, of course, with this Native American basket motif to sort of declare this land as indigenous land and the surrounding sea historically and in the present day.
And I think it's a reminder that artists from Marsden Hartley's time in the 1930s to today are continually compelled to engage with the challenge, the aesthetic and artistic challenge of trying to capture this experience of the sea, the beauty and the textures and the feel, and the ways in which it's connected to different histories. And Dan, you should mention Hartley's connection to the Beauty Essex Museum.
Well, I very proudly, I would say that he wrote some letters in which he described his inspiration for his paintings through coming to the Peabody Essex Museum, which has a very strong collection of figureheads and ship models and marine paintings. And he talked about looking very carefully at the rigging and the models and that sort of thing. And so to think that a static museum collection can inspire an artist to create works like this is, it's wonderful.
And this is really an emotional work because he's looking at Orchard Beach on a very stormy, kind of desolate day, but he's painting this during World War II at a moment when more than 4,000 miles of coastline were being patrolled by the Coast Guard and civilian volunteers to keep a lookout for the fear of German U-boats that might attack our shores. And then this goes in a completely different direction, highly abstract. In fact, our horizon has been cropped off the screen. There has this very, very thin blue line. But Deben Korn was an artist who set up in a former sailmaker's loft in Ocean Park in Santa Monica, California, and was deeply inspired by those environs, the light, the form, and had a process of scraping his canvas down like a wave washing the sand clean and starting and building his canvases up, building from this beautiful cerulean blue kind of ground on the painting. And Clifford, I know it's a particular favorite of yours.
I just think it's sort of like that Trost Richards. This is an inspired painting. It speaks a language that is, it certainly is obviously an abstract painting, but it is so evocative of our world. And there's something in the context of your show where the land, whether it is farmland from above or the streets of a city, but it's so incredible, it's ironic. There's an incredible deep blue at the top. Don't miss it. But it's as if all of this land and farmland and cities, they're coiled up against what? The vastness of the ocean, which is just at the top. And it is a sensual painting. You were today, Austin was looking at it and she went, I don't know if you even knew, you went like that to mimic one of the strokes. Yeah. And it's a beautiful picture.
And this Amy Sherald, which if you are a frequent visitor to Crystal Bridges will be familiar to you, was acquired in 2020. Amy Sherald is the artist who painted the portrait of First Lady Michelle Obama. And she, I think, is just one-upping all of the traditions in this show in a very beautiful way. This is a very classical painting. It's monumental, it's statuesque, and she is engaging, it's called Precious Jewels by the Sea. And she is picturing these four teenagers against this turquoise water with a little sailboat on the horizon, all of the hallmarks of kind of light dappled surface. There's a beautiful still life in the lower right corner of beach grasses and shells and this kind of prism-like beach umbrella. But she is showing that these experiences of things that she normally does, going to the beach, painting these beautiful portraits of this very distinctive kind of gray, charcoal, brown skin tone, that these are the precious jewels by the sea that are not normally seen in monumental paintings in museums. And so for her, this is a way to kind of engage with marine traditions, engage with principles of classicism, great painting. And so we're really thrilled that this picture is a part of the conversation.
Can I just point quickly, in the lower left-hand corner, it's hard to see, but there's a very old-fashioned picnic basket. Yeah. And to me, the minute I saw that painting, I was just saying, it's powerful, powerful, monumental, as you said. But that picnic basket is so much about such a famous painting back. And here you've got four proud African Americans taking the beach for themselves, instead of it always, in so much of the history of art, being about white folks. And that basket is Déjeuner sur l'herbe, yeah, right? And so, in a way, this artist has taken on our political moment, I think, with a great painting, but also art history. Absolutely. And I think it's an incredible thing that it's here. It's just great. Yeah.
And then this is the last slide we have in the presentation, where we wanted to just bring you back to that moment of that contemplation by the sea that allure of the horizon, of the ships beyond, of that beautiful cresting wave, and kind of, again, that kind of classical geometry of this composition that an artist like Amy Sherald is making her own in a new way. And Dan, you maybe can talk about exactly where this is.
Well, this is, it's actually called Mingo Beach in Beverly Farms. The original Beverly in the United States. Beverly Hills is named after Beverly in Massachusetts, for those who care. And so Kensett was always known to be a Hudson River School painter, and a lot of woods and a lot of river scenes and the Adirondack forests and things. And a minority of his works are he spent 6 summers up on this shore and painted these very expansive beach scenes. And what I love about them is that he strips down the paintings to the basic geometry. He's got this incredibly powerful horizon, a rock all the way to the left, and then this diagonal sort of line which draws you into the painting. And then he's dotted it all with the seaweed. So it's very realistic at this one time, and also very sort of structurally abstract at the other end, but it's one that it just can't help but draw you in, and there you are, standing there, whether you're the man or the woman, looking out to sea at the vastness of that space. And I would think to say, if I were a marine painter, I would probably say that this is among the hardest kinds of subjects to paint. It's the vacuousness, it's the open expanse where there's a lack of subject matter, where you're painting the atmosphere, where the sea meets the sky, and that horizon line, which is really everything, where our eye always goes to. So it's one of my favorites. I think I've only said that twice, which is an accomplishment for me.
No, it's amazing. And I think too that this sort of emotional journey, and Clifford, you've spoken so eloquently about what it means to kind of stand and think about the beyond and the painting.
Does it?
There's nothing left to say. That's it.
Well, we really appreciate your engagement with this exhibition, and hope you've enjoyed our conversation about so many of the wonderful works in the show. There's many, many more, but wanted to give you a flavor. And of course, Clifford, thank you so much for your engagement with these traditions that this show is trying to engage in new ways, and for the ways in which your art is pushing us to see it differently. And I think, Moira, do we have time for questions? And Moira has a microphone. If anybody has a question, we would be delighted to answer it. I think we also might have some questions from Facebook. We'll see. Not yet.
We have a question over here.
The museum also is open until 9, so we will not be offended if you get up and go see the show. So please take advantage. Thank you.
So you did such a great job of painting the poetic side of the sea, the powerful side of the sea, the merchant side of the sea. I feel like we've seen a lot of it. How does this set the grounds now for contemporary and modern and new artists to paint the sea? Because it's a never-ending canvas, right? Like, we're always going to get inspiration from it. Where do you think is going to be the growth from now on?
Great question.
It's a very interesting question. So one of the amazing things that we can look at is this sort of transition, and there's a lot of overlap to it about the significance of the sea in people's lives. And this isn't distinctive of America, of course, because you see artists engaging with the sea all around the world with different messaging. But what is it about the sea that we think about? What's top of mind? What's in the newspapers today? It's about migration, mass migration around the world. It's about the ecological impact and the influence of the sea in our environment, even here in Arkansas. The ocean, the Pacific Ocean, has a huge impact on the climate here locally. And so this kind of knowledge, I think, is working its way into a whole new generation of artists who are engaging with sea themes in ways that artists may have done a little bit before. But I have a file this thick of interesting artists who are engaging with this topic right now in ways that I think are wholly new and more relevant than ever. So it's very common for people who study historical American art to say, well, the relevance of marine painting was on the wane when photography came into play, because artists didn't have to paint the ships, they could just snap a picture of them. Maybe that's true. I mean, I think that's sort of a trite kind of explanation for it. And all of a sudden, we're seeing a whole new sort of wave of relevancy of the sea.
Yeah, I would just, one of the most shocking things that's really ever occurred for me in a discussion with somebody was a very active environmentalist was grilling me about my experiences with the sea. And I couldn't tell where he was coming from in the discussion. And at a certain point he said, has it ever dawned on you that people are looking at your photographs differently now? And do you know what you were photographing? And I sort of was a little perplexed, and I said, the ocean, the sublime. And then it dawned on me that I started in '96, and over this period of time, I am now forced to see these works as I'm photographing nature plus what? Humankind's intervention through climate change. And so I was not being conscious or, an environmentalist calling them Hurricane 1, Hurricane 82, and so on. But what's shocking is that the ocean is beginning to appear, even looking back in my own photographs, as something different. The Gulf Stream is changing, and the ocean now represents one of the barometers, as it were, for this planet. We now know that. And it'd be interesting I can't do it, but to have somebody, we were talking about neuroscientists earlier and stuff, but if you've got scientists to analyze, the incredible history of ocean painting that's here, are there clues there about how the ocean was then compared to where it is now, much less the prediction of where we'll be? So
Fast forward 100 years and we'll know.
Yeah.
So it's a great question. I think to your point that the change that is underscoring your comments will always inspire artists to address and interpret.
With so much of our population moving to the coast, and now so many Americans live in these large, teeming coastal cities and so forth, how have you seen, or how do you expect to see the representation and aesthetics of the sea change as the way that Americans live right up next to the shoreline has changed over the last couple centuries?
That's a great question. You want to answer that?
That's a challenging thing to answer, only because our perspectives on the sea have changed so much. When I look at the coastline of like Miami Beach, or downtown New York, and somebody is observing the sea from the 60th story of some tower, to me that it looks, granted I live in a 3-story house, but to me that just looks really just so fragile, and these living there to me appears so vulnerable, that would an artist approach that? Would an artist try to recreate that image? I don't know. What would speak to the people who live in those places? What is that? What is relevant to them in those terms? Is it a vision like this? I doubt it. I think we probably have to see what comes of it.
We can look to popular culture. I was thinking about A Perfect Storm, and the next image, because of that question that came to mind, I'm a fan of plain old Hollywood movies, and there was a movie, I think it was called Sudden Impact or Armageddon, one of these disaster movies. And toward the end of the movie, an enormous asteroid comes in and hits the ocean. And Tia Leone's character, she's just made up with her father, from whom she was estranged, and they're on the beach. I was told it was the beach I was photographing on, for my own narcissism, and they're there, the daughter and the father, and they're made up. and they're watching, you know, a 2,000-foot wave come at them. And whether it's in that movie or another, eventually that wave, as I recall, it hits Manhattan. And although, you know, we are looking at so-called fine art, there is really no dramatic line, I think, between popular culture and fine art. There are important nuances, but I do think that as we go forward, the art world, art makers are going to be dealing with this future question. And it's either going to be done directly, like that rather kitsch movie, or more obliquely. It's going to happen. Those cities and our edges are vulnerable.
Okay, I think we want to make sure that everyone has time to see the exhibition. And again, thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Dan and Clifford, for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.